Welcome to Conservative Solution for Our Common Challenges. My name is Dan Albus. I serve as the Member of Parliament for Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, in the beautiful interior of British Columbia. And this podcast is all about focusing on the people who are working every day, not for the headline, not for the spotlight, but are putting in the work to make this country a better place to be, to make their communities stronger, and their families as well. So I interview people who inspire me, and I hope you'll be inspired by them. Today we're talking about the business of making British Columbia wine, surviving extreme weather events, navigating rules that can make or break a small producer, and finding customers across this great country. My guest is Ron Kubek, owner of Lightning Rock Winery in Summerland, a former municipal councillor, real estate leader, and past president of the Summerland Chamber of Commerce. Ron, it's wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Dan. Nice to see you in person. You know, we talk a lot, but it's nice to see you in person.
You know what? It's always great to be in the Okanagan. So let's start by, how are you doing? What's keeping you occupied for most of your time? Is it the vineyard? Is it the cellar? Is it business? Is it volunteering?
Yes, that's a simple answer. So I can take my time, I divide it into about 150%. So 50% of my time is working. We had to do some replanting after a cold. We're getting ready for the new season. We're doing some new construction. We've got some new staff. We had some staff leave. 50% of my time is lobbying different levels of government, not for financial support, but to make it easier for us to do what we do. You know, and I'm not here to whine about wine. I'm here to try and make it easier is what we do. And the other 50% of my time is doing volunteer work. And so when I talk about that, yeah, my wife goes, "There's just not enough time in the day." And I go, "Yep, that's right."
Well, you know, people might think that Ron is joking, but literally he puts 150% into everything he does. So when he talks about 50%, 50%, 50%, he's absolutely right. Let's talk about a little bit about your volunteering first, because I know you volunteer with a great organization, People in Motion. What brought you that organization? Why do you continue to volunteer?
Well, People in Motion runs a ski program called the Powder Hounds program at Big White. And Big White, the ownership and the senior vice presidents are wonderful supporters of it. You know, free passes for all of our volunteers. The funds from the recent TELUS Cup went to the Powder Hounds program because I do a lot of work with a sit ski, and each sit ski is about $12,000 to $14,000. And so we raise all our money, and seeing the smile on people's faces when we're flying around the hill, when we're teaching people that couldn't ski. And I got involved because my wife's son, my stepson, has cerebral palsy and only half a brain due to seizures. And so what we were able to do with him is get him out of a sit ski. We had him on tether skiing, and now he can do green and even some light blue runs all on his own. We just have to give him some guidance. And so to me, I got involved because to whom much is given, much is required. Not suggested, it's required. So I'll get up in the morning, I'll do a couple hours worth of winery work, then I'll go out and teach from 8:30 until 3:30, and then I'll come in and work until about 8:30 or 9 o'clock on more winery or lobbying efforts, as I say right now.
Well, you've worn a lot of hats, public office, obviously your real estate business as a builder of that, the chamber president, winery owner. What pulled you back into the land and specifically into wine?
Well, I wanted to do something with my daughter who, you know, and do something different there. She's gone on to do her own winery in Summerland, so we support each other's wineries in terms of that. And so then it was just saying, okay, how can I make a difference? And, you know, we've been very lucky. Last year we had the #1 Pinot in Canada, according to the Wine and Line. We got number 23 winery, which for a small 5,000 case winery is pretty good. You know, we won a lot of awards in Alberta and in Washington State. And to me, it's the farming. You know, my grandparents were farmers. They, on my dad's side, came from Slovakia. And so they had been dairy farmers. And so for me, it's just something about, you know, I enjoy being out there. You know, my wife, Tracy, will say that, you know, Ron's happiest is when he's spending 8 or 10 hours out on a tractor and doing different things. But being able to see it, grow the business, work with some talented people. My winemaker, Sebastian's phenomenal at what he does. And it's just being able to say, okay, what can we do? How can we grow? And that led me to do some of the lobbying work.
Well, you know, a small family winery, it's always amazing with how many jobs that someone has to do. And now to find out there's 2 small family wineries from the same family is a lot. So take us back to the cold snap that happened in 2024. What did you see happen to your vines? And when did you realize the season was in real trouble?
Well, when we hit the cold weather in January, we hit -26 for 3 days. And we realized we were going to have a problem. And so my staff went out and took some clippings and we put them into some water. I mean, they do all that technical stuff. That's not what I do, but they had them growing in there, and we were hoping that some buds were going to push. Not one bud pushed, not a primary, not a secondary, not a tertiary. They were just a bunch of dead sticks that we had. And we realized that we had a problem February. We started lobbying the government, and in March, I guess it was. And the interesting thing is Washington State really came to the aid of BC. I learned about the import of grapes into BC and in Canada from the Washington State wine growers, not from the BC government, not from the federal government, but from the Washington State wine growers. And unfortunately, the BC government didn't do anything until the end of July of 24. And Tracy and I knew we were going to have to go and buy grapes. So she and I, and then Sebastian and I, had made trips to Washington State to find out where we could buy some grapes. We also knew that we had to replace at the vineyard where the winery is about 40% of the plants. The other vineyards that I have at about between 10 and 15%. I got off lucky. I know of some of the big three wineries in the area that are replacing thousands of acres. You know, I know of ex-MLA and his family's winery, and they're replacing 400 acres. And so we got off lucky on that. And the program that the government said that they had for it didn't cover any of the replant program. But they had said, well, you can bring in fruit from Washington State and we'll let you treat it like previous BC fruit. And they came up with a program called the Olympic Average. And that was designed so that wineries wouldn't go out and exceed what they had done in previous years. Unfortunately, the BCLDB, to make sure that they get the revenues up so that they can get their bonuses, have said, no, you can't exceed the sales, and we're going to include all of your back vintages. So not only did I have to buy fruit, so it was a couple $100,000 that we had to pay for fruit. We had to also pay for our replanting. We also had to farm what we had so that we could have a crop in 25. Now the BCLDB, through their infinite wisdom, is like, no, we're going to tax you because we don't want you to grow. And if you do sell anything, you're going to have to pay a tax. And I know of some wineries, you know, there's some that are in your riding that are paying $500,000 in up to $500,000 in a tax when they only brought in 1/3 of what they normally grow. And so the program was designed by Treasury. And I think that, you know, Mike Farnworth was very good about it. But the problem is that BCLDB co-opted it and they turned it into a revenue generator. So only the BC government can turn a catastrophe into a revenue generation for the government. And I didn't ask the province for a dime. I don't think you know, for where you live, should have to pay anything for my losing fruit. I'm a farmer. But the government shouldn't profit off of a catastrophe. And it's calling out the hypocrisy of that. And so, you know, I deal with other wineries and I fight really hard for that. And so we have to watch where our sales are so that we don't exceed, because if we exceed what the government says that we're allowed to sell, it's an 89% tax.
So you said you've been spending about 50% of your time lobbying different levels of government. So it obviously was about this and how you were promised a support program to kind of on a temporary basis, but then the way that it came and rolled out, the taxation was much more draconian. So what did you say to government and what did they have to say back?
I have a lot of interaction with Lana Popham, the Minister of Agriculture, who's been charged with BCLDB and LCRB. The problem in dealing with her, and you know, she and I get along. Her chief of staff, Samuel, and I talk a lot. Mm-hmm. Usually after interviews, I get a text message going, Ron, what were you thinking? And then we talk it out. And he does it. He says that her hands are tied because of Treasury Board. So I reached out to Treasury Board in BC, and I've reached out to the Premier. He then refers me back to Lana. I reached out to Mike Farnworth. He's not gotten there. Brenda Bailey just delivered her budget, and so we're all devastated on that. But we're trying to get her to realize that we've got friends of ours that are in wineries that are laying off people because they have to deal with this taxation. We know that there's people looking at not buying as much fruit this year, which is going to affect the grape growers because they don't want to get above this Olympic average. The Olympic average was designed, or the vintage replacement program was designed in a really good way so that people didn't exceed it. The problem is that BCLDB corrupted it so that they could make revenue, and they were trying to make up about $22 million in revenue. They're doing that off of the backs of people who lost all their fruit, went out there and spent money to try and solve a problem. Didn't ask for any money from the government. All I'm asking is don't tax us. And hopefully Treasury Board will realize this. You know, Lana says her hands are tied. And I think, you know, you doing what you do in Ottawa, you see it. The deep state, the swamp, is big, and it's really big in BC. And you've got really well-meaning people. I mean, Lana and I have known each other before she got into provincial politics. She's a good person. Mike Farnworth helped me out on an issue. He's very good. Samuel, who's Lana's chief of staff, very good. But they run up against a deputy minister and the CEO of a crown corporation that don't care about job growth. They don't care about what happens. You know, the report just came out, 1 in 4 Canadians is employed by some level of government. That's disgusting, right, as a taxpayer. And so, you know, we're up against a swamp that is only interested in their own interests. So I know people who are not going ahead on new construction, so that's going to affect people. They've laid off people. We had people that had left us and resigned. We didn't replace them. And so we're all having to do this. And so the government talks about trying to grow revenue, but at the same time, they're penalizing you if you try and do anything. So I deal with that in the BC level. And I had made a proposal to Lana that said, you know, to the minister, you know, I always say, should I call her Minister Popham? She's like, Ron, just call me Lana. I gave her 6 things that could reform BC, working with Al Hudick, a good friend of ours, who's a lawyer, who's the industry leader, about 6 things that could help British Columbia that cost the taxpayers $0. Nothing. They said they can't do anything. I mean, we're still operating on archaic rules. For example, tied house rules. We have restaurant chains in BC that are Canada-wide. Restaurant chains are not allowed to invest in wineries. These are tied to pub rules back in the 1800s from Britain, for crying out loud. We've got the LCRB that won't allow off-site tasting rooms. So, you know your area, you've got some rural jurisdictions and, you know, even further south in some of your ridings, like where Helen is. The tasting rooms don't make sense there. But let me put a tasting room into Vancouver, or let me put one into Victoria. That's not allowed. You know, one of our major customers, they've got 22 of their 115 stores have liquor licenses. Can't get a new liquor license in BC until 2032 because of Able BC lobbying the government to say no more new liquor stores. So BC, for example, has 932 stores. Alberta has 2,500 points to buy alcohol. Ontario opened it up with the Trump tariffs to now over 10,000. They added 6,500 this year. Quebec has over 12,500 spots to buy alcohol. BC has 932. And so all these proposals that I keep making to Lana, and the problem with the government is that the ministers are trying to get things done, but the deputy ministers and the executives at these crown corporations are pushing back so hard, and they tell these horror stories. You know, and the Olympic average was a perfect example. The BC GEU goes on strike in October. Wineries like mine, other ones, you know, Dirty Laundry that's in your neighborhood, stepped up, and we supplied restaurants. We supplied liquor stores with business to stay, or, you know, with wine to stay open. The BC-LDB is now trying to capitalize on that because, you're going to be above your Olympic average. So because you helped us out when the BC GEU is on strike, hey, your benefit is, Ron, you get to pay 89%.
Wow. So
that's just one province.
And so those are different. It sounds like you're trying to make things work, but these decisions often, because it's a large liquor monopoly, and we'll get to the problems we have across this country with liquor monopolies. It seems like they only care about the bottom line, not your bottom line, but their bottom line, so they can write the checks that go to the finance minister.
The BC wine industry is about a $4 billion economic impact in the province. $1 generated on the sale of a BC wine generates about $3.74 of economic activity. $1 of imported wine offers $1 of economic activity. The problem is that the BC LDB is not listening to, you know, Minister Ravi Kahlon, who says we want to build jobs. They're not listening to Lana Turner or Lana Popham, who says we want to have agri-tourism. We want to build that up. They're only caring about the bottom line, you know, and with the size of the deficit and everything else, I mean, the BC LDB gives about $1 billion to the BC government. But how much are they taking out of the economy?
Yes.
How much? And this is just wine. You know, the craft breweries, the amount of craft breweries shutting down, Dan, is just so disheartening. People who put their life savings into doing this because the tax is over $1 to $1.50 a liter. Private distilleries that are, you know, BC made, you know, here in Kelowna, for example, have to pay 120% to the government. And again, we don't have a revenue problem in this country. What we have is a spending problem, and we have greedy civil servants who only care about the bottom line so that they can increase their bonuses. And you try and talk to them, and LDB is like, I'm better off talking to the wall or this table than I am talking to LDB. They don't care. They won't change. LCRB, the deputy minister there, we talk, we get along. He says he wants to make some changes. We'll see. But, all of the things that I've suggested, that Wine Growers BC have suggested, will cost the BC government nothing. It will open up opportunity. And that's all I want. It's like I said, when the cold snap hit, I didn't ask the government for a handout. I just want the government to get out of my way. There are many successful wineries and business people in your riding that know how to make money, that know how to do stuff, that aren't asking for a dime of government dollars, that are only going to help employ more British Columbians, more Canadians. But these crown corporations, these huge monopolies, can't see past the end of their bonus check. And it's really sad. And so, some of the changes that I've suggested, Al Hudick was doing some of this for Christy Clark when she was there, and it didn't get implemented. Why? Because of the deep state, because of the swamp. There was changes made on that before. Some of these things that we're suggesting go back years. Offsite tasting rooms. Just go to Washington, go to Woodinville, go to Walla Walla, and you can see that. Why can't someone? We've got the World Cup coming to Vancouver. Wine growers said, hey, how about we just do a blanket thing like they did for the Canadian Olympic hockey game and say all the bars and restaurants can be open when they want. LCRB says, nope, you have to apply for a special permit. They're already understaffed. You apply for a special permit, and there's only 6 special permits allowed for restaurants or lounges or liquor stores per year. So what are they going to do? And so for a business, we want to go and do all the stuff, but the government doesn't have enough people, if you can believe it, because they make so many rules. I was in real estate for 28 years. Helping clients get out of do a development or helping sell real estate or do anything else is way easier than selling a $25 bottle of wine. The government here makes it so hard to do it. And it's just very frustrating.
Well, and to that point, we're seeing a lot of wineries that are now for sale or they've actually been forced by court order on sale. A lot of well-known small craft breweries have closed. And a lot of it, I believe, has to do with taxation. And like you said, the overregulation or lack of flexibility to try something new. And this April 1st, like every April, there's an excise adjustment at the federal level that hits producers' cash flow and their price lists. So with excise tax rising along with inflation, what does that increase mean for a small winery like yours in a tight year?
Again, any business operates on cash flow. You've got profit and you've got cash flow. The thing about the way the excise tax was designed is because the Trudeau government didn't push back against the stuff from Australia. We could have won it. When you take a look at what wine industries are subsidized around the world, my gosh, in Italy, for example, they get given their glass, their corks, and their labels. In France, they get given to 75% of their equipment or more, depending on the technology that goes on. Australia, with their low taxes that they do. The interesting thing in Canada is taxes on alcohol exceed taxes on gasoline. So there's more taxes on a liter of alcohol in Canada than there is on a liter of gasoline. And so we make jobs, we create jobs. We're small business people. You take a look in BC, there's upwards of 14,000 people.
You're farmers.
We're farmers. And, we've got differences in our groups. You got BC grape growers, we're trying to capitalize last year on a really good year, and they're trying to get all their money back. And there's a limit to what people in BC will spend. And we're very, very lucky that people in BC spend money. And we ship in that gray area across Canada. And after being, having the #1 Pinot and being the number 23 winery, according to the Wine Line Awards and winning awards in Alberta, we've got people ordering our wine. But the government seems intent on how they can destroy it. When you talk about businesses going, LCRB, the only change that they've made since, I've been dealing with this, is they got rid of the 4,500 liter minimum production for a winery. So that means over the next couple of years, you're going to see a lot of wineries slowly just closing down, because now they don't have to produce 4,500 liters. They can sell off their inventory and then just sell off their real estate like it was a fancy estate rather than an ongoing concern. And it really bothers me. Someone goes, well, that makes you happy having stuff shut down. No, the people who were opposed to the vintage replacement program were wineries that had too much inventory. Those of us that sell were not opposed to it. I would like a doubling of the number of wineries. Someone's like, well, aren't you worried about getting your share of the pie? And I'm like, no, just make your share of the pie bigger.
Yes.
We shipped off to a pallet of wine to Washington State yesterday. Let's go there. And with the changes in Alberta recently, we're looking at those things. And so it's really sad. I hate it when anyone goes out of business, whether it's a brewery, whether it's a cidery, whether it's a winery, because those were people who had a belief, they had a passion for what they do, and they've just been crushed by government. And someone goes, well, it's not all only government. If you look at all the paperwork that I have to deal with just to try and sell a bottle of wine, and people go, oh, stop whining about wine. I'm not whining about wine. I'm just telling if you had to deal with what we do to make $1, you'd be like, oh my gosh, do I really want to do this job anymore?
Oh, no, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you're shipping to Washington State. So obviously that's in the United States. Where do you see right now your brightest spots? Because as you said, some provinces like Nova Scotia, like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and of course British Columbia, they're open to the free trade of Canadian wine, beer, and spirits. But when you start going to shipping to Washington State, to me that sends a signal that there's something wrong here.
There's a huge amount wrong. Recently, last year I rallied against Danielle Smith and her Trump tariffs. And I give her credit and I give Dale Talley, the Minister of Red Tape, credit because they've just announced that they're getting rid of the ad valorem tax, or I call it the Trump tax, which was a tax on a tax. And they've gone to their flat rate, which makes it really simple. So it's going to be $4 and some odd cents a liter, so about $3.54 a bottle, which works out to around between 8 and 15% on a bottle of our wine, which is similar to our 10% here. But it's going into Washington State. My biggest fear with the current federal government is that the only way that he's going to get elected is by picking a fight with Donald Trump, and he's going to probably blow up CUSMA, Canada, U.S., Mexico agreement, the former NAFTA, USMCA, whatever country you're in that you talk about. Because under CUSMA, we're allowed to ship to the U.S. duty-free, tariff-free. In fact, if Canadians realize 75% of the goods covered by CUSMA go back and forth that are not affected. And instead of trying to solve it and working with our biggest neighbor and our biggest partner, the current Prime Minister seems intent on fighting a battle and doing all he can to destroy that relationship. And I've got family in the States, I got family in Canada. I've got friends in the States, I got friends down in Canada. And so, but the current Prime Minister and the Liberal Party seem intent on just doing nothing but destroying that relationship. And they're flying all over the world trying to create new relationships. And I'm like, but we've got the biggest trading partners right next door. Like, stop this little, playground fight and get realistic.
Well, from your viewpoint, right now you're getting better access to the United States market, which is a large population, than you are to your own country. Yeah. That to me is the ridiculous part. We have provinces like Ontario and Quebec that their large liquor monopolies have said, oh, we'll send our products to British Columbia, no problem, and yet don't allow our Okanagan and Similkameen and Island wineries to do the same. To me, that's a big problem. So cracking down on these trade barriers, I know there's lots of talk about it. Apparently, we were supposed to remove all trade barriers, but I know from our conversations that isn't gone. And that's one of the reasons why I've put forward a private members bill to allow a simple buy, ship, and sip anywhere in Canada. So it basically treats wine, beer or spirits, as a national product. From a practical standpoint, what are the benefits do you think? One or two benefits you think would directly help a winery like yours or your daughter's?
Well, I think that the opening up of Canada, they've said that if we get rid of the internal barriers in Canada, not just in wine, but in everything, we can improve our GDP by up to 7%. Why are we flying around the world, or why is the Prime Minister flying around the world other than to benefit his company? If we can just get 7% here at home, most of us would be ecstatic on that. And it's being able to access Canada. I'm off to Toronto in April for a SIPS thing to meet industry. But the challenge is that if I go into Ontario, it's 71% markup. I go into the US, it's 0. If I go into Quebec, it's 120%. If I go to South Korea, it's 0. And so the government is forcing me to go outside of Canada instead of building up a stronger Canada, so that if we had a fight with the US, like what Mr. Carney seems intent on doing, we could survive that. but we've become weak because of our internal borders. You know, Doug Ford went on CNBC last February and said, Mr. Trump, you remove your tariffs, I'll remove mine. So I sent him a letter and I give him credit. He responded to me and he put me in touch with his finance minister. I talked to his one of his staff members in June. I then hadn't gotten anywhere. Talked to another one back in November. I talked to a parliamentary assistant, and we have the dialogue going. Because what Mr. Ford did is when he saw all this problem, he said, we're going to open up grocery stores, big box stores, convenience stores to Ontario wine, Ontario beer, Ontario cider, and Ontario RTD. I asked the BC government, would we do the same thing? And they said, no, nothing, because of the monopoly that was created by Able BC, that nothing will happen until 2032. So instead of taking a challenge and saying we're going to fix it, BC did nothing. Ontario did, but it still cost me 71.5%. And then I sent them a letter saying, hey, I'll collect the HST for you. The finance ministry member that I was talking to said, Ron, that's great that you do that, but our system is not up to taking that 15%. Dan, this is 2026. I mean, AI could recreate me if I really wanted to.
Well, where there's a will, there's a way. But I'm quite worried about this because, right now, provinces like Ontario, Quebec, and many maritime provinces, except, of course, Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, by the way, has the most arable land. It's affordable, and they actually have one of the smallest wine consumption per capita in the country. So they want an expanded Canadian market. But essentially, what I'm worried about is they've gone from, nope, you can't do this, to now they're trying to get the liquor monopolies to give the appearance that they will allow direct to consumer. But in fact, they're just going to add markups so that both the province where you buy it from and the province that you live in both end up charging large markups, which essentially take a $50 bottle of wine and make it 100 or more. No one is going to do that. Just the shipping alone makes this a small quantity of beer, wine, and spirits that people will send. So the bill itself would just simply allow Canada Post or another trusted carrier to send, and you could send it to anyone across Canada. So is that the kind of initiative that you think would put some pressure on these governments to open up?
What I appreciate about you, Dan, is that you and I tried this before, and you brought a private member's bill forward. We got thousands of signatures across the country, and then it died because of the snap election by Mr. Trudeau. You're still doing it. I know you have lots of other things that you're responsible for, but what I appreciate and what other wineries like me appreciate is you never left us behind. For you, it's a small thing. For us, it's huge, being able to access Canada. Canada's 41 to 43 million people, depends on how many they let in the door through immigration last week. But we have a large population. Why can't people in Ontario or Quebec buy BC wine for the same price that people in BC can buy that same wine? Quebec gives preferential treatment to France versus the rest of Canada, right? The BCLDB would rather bring in foreign wine. They took 3 months, Dan, after they pulled the USA wine from the shelf so that they could sell imported wine. And I take a look at it and I go, I thought in June we had a deal between the BC and Ontario government because I'm dealing with the finance ministry. I said, listen, you guys are already allowed to ship here. I ordered 2 cases of wine from Ontario wineries, great wine from Ontario wineries, loved it. And they said, well, we're going to do this. And they came up with an MOU. And so the problem in Canada is that the MOUs of, supposed to be a memorandum of understanding, they've really turned into a memorandum of uselessness. There's been nothing done. And like you said, the BCLDB is trying to figure out how they can fix that loophole of wine being shipped in here so they can tax it. Other provinces are saying, okay, how can we go and tax it? And, it was sad to see that only 9 provinces and the federal government signed on to this supposed May 1st date that's coming. Your bill is going to hopefully put pressure on them, and thank you for tabling it. And hopefully the federal government goes, instead of voting against everything that's conservative because that's just a knee-jerk reaction of the current government, hey, this might solve our problem. You've made a chance for the Liberals to actually win at something, and you've made it so that people across Canada can win. I'm sure that them and the lobbyists from all of these liquor monopolies are going to try and figure out how to squash it. And it's really too bad because yours is a really simple bill. And that's what I really enjoyed working with you on it. It's really simple. It just says, thou shalt be allowed to ship wine across Canada without imported duties. And, I've offered any of the provinces I talk to collect their PST or their HST, whatever it's done, so that we don't have to charge it in BC. So I'm trying to make it so that they're going to get revenue. They don't want to do it. Because why? Because they're addicted to the tax revenue like a crack addict is to cocaine. And that always gets me into trouble when I talk about certain governments.
Yeah.
But
at the end of the day, I think most Canadians would say this is a united Canada. We should be able to have a toast from coast to coast to coast and share with one another, raise up, not just the economy. And my bill will certainly do that, but without adding the extra cost and red tape that goes along with that.
Well, the excise tax is a perfect example. The government didn't fight it, so Mr. Trudeau brings it in. But then he says, well, we're going to have a rebate program. Well, the problem is from a cash flow point of view, I'm paying that excise tax when I bottle. So we do a lot of sparkling or traditional method bubbles or champagne, they would call it. We pay tax on that when I bottle it, not when I sell it. How would you like to, go to work, or someone watching this, they're going to work. How would you like to pay tax on the income that you're going to get between now and the end of the year? That is how badly this program was designed. Instead of saying you can pay it when it's sold, then we could add the 67 cents on or 70 cents on or whatever else is. No, in their infinite wisdom, because it was done by a bureaucrat who doesn't understand cash flow in business.
You pay it up front.
And so some of the wine that we've bottled, it sits in warehouses, it's aging for 2 or 3 years. We're paying tax when we bottle it, not when we sell it. Yeah. So we've got that cost.
Yes, I know a lot of spirits have said that is a major problem. And this is one of the reasons why they can't grow their business.
Well, government's they don't have to worry about cash flow because they're confiscatory in their income tax and all their other taxes. So they don't care. They get their money no matter what. But if your bureaucrat said, hey, if you said to someone who was working in, not in your department, say in one of the ministries, we want you to pay your income tax on what you're going to make for the rest of the year now. They're like, whoa, I didn't get the money yet. But that's what this whole excise tax thing's doing.
Well, and that's really why we elect people, both the MLA, provincial level, and MP, federal, so that they can make those requests and see some change in the system. Now, Ron, I know there's a lot of things that you're dealing with, and I just want to say though, what keeps you going? What keeps you, as an entrepreneur, where you're willing to work as hard as you are?
All it takes for evil to persist in the world or through government is one person to do nothing. And so, it would be easy to be retired. It would be easy to go back and do that, but that's not right. I'm a proud British Columbian. I'm a proud Canadian, and we need to fix it. I don't care whether you're liberal, conservative, NDP, PQ, Bloc, it doesn't matter to me. We should be Canadians first, and we're not. And so I wake up every day and I fight sometimes some of the battles, and my wife is like, why do you fight so hard? You're doing it because it's the right thing to do, Dan. Just like what you do every day, it's the right thing to do. And, I applaud you every day for what you do. I applaud you for what the leader's doing. And even for people who are in government who maybe not be as vocal or maybe not as focused for what they're doing. And I think the time that we have to be as Canadians is we have to stay to the deep state, the swamp, the government bureaucrats. No, this is our country, not yours. It doesn't belong to you to tax the crap out of people like me and everybody else. You need to stop working for yourselves and start working for Canadians. And that's what I appreciate about you.
Well, Ron, thank you for your candor and for the grit that it takes to keep, a small family winery alive through very tough times. Conversations like this remind us that policy isn't abstract. It lands on real families, real farms, and our communities. I interview the people who inspire me, and I hope that people are inspired by some of your words today too, Ron. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who cares about Canadian producers and a truly national market for Canadian wine, beer, and spirits. I'm Dan Elvis. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.